payments to me is at the center of this, right?
If there was no payments, there'd be no fraud.
Exactly.
It was all velocity based, is what I feel like. Is how many times did somebody do something
I also want to think about, what's ahead.
and just hit it till they run out of inventory.
All right, welcome back to Connecting the Dots in FinTech. Today, a very special guest. We're going to turn the tables around a little bit, right? So, Jordan, I'll let you introduce yourself and we'll kind of go from there.
So my name is Jordan Harris. I am currently the Senior Director of Fraud Prevention at a company called iHerb, but I'm also the host of the Fraud Boxer podcast. So usually I'm the one that has to do that intro. It's a lot nicer to be on this side of the table and not have to do 8 takes of that sort of thing. You didn't do that. You did all in 1 take, so you're a pro already, but it's so nice.
I don't know if a pro. I think I've had a good role model to look up to, obviously, right here.
That's right.
Look, you have an extensive experience in fraud, right? And I think when I look at the journey, and we've talked about this already quite a few times, but when I look at your journey and what you've achieved, what you've seen, the shifts, it's going to work very well. And so the topic of the day is going to be the evolution of fraud.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, the best way to look at this and to make it, very much something that the people watching us and hearing us are going to be able to digest as well is talking about your experience. So maybe we start with,
Who I am?
Yeah.
Where did I come from? Yeah. So I came from a small town in Salem, Oregon, where I started in retail. And we'll talk a little bit about like some of what I saw in retail fraud because, that is kind of where I first ever really experienced fraud. We didn't really think of it like we do now. Back then, it was just somebody trying to pull a fast one. But when I joined the world of of digital fraud, it was more a company called Fandango, which does movie tickets, and then I did health and wellness company called Golden Hippo Media. Went up and did Gift up in the Bay Area, which was a gift card reseller. So not a marketplace, but a reseller. It was essentially money transfer. At the end of the day, they were part of First Data. And then most people know me from my days at Ticketmaster, the world's largest ticketing merchant. And you can imagine some of the things not only did we have in regular purchase fraud, but in marketplace fraud and those sorts of things, collusion, those sorts of activities that kind of takes it a step further than what we normally see in carding. So at iHerb, we are a global company, 180 countries, and a lot of those countries are emerging markets. So you can kind of probably guess some of the challenges that come with that. Credit cards might be new. They might not understand how purchasing works. They also always think they found a loophole, like always. So lots to talk about there.
Let's say it's probably the loopholes that they think of. You've probably seen them like a million times.
We found them, unplugged them 10 years ago.
So I kind of love this. So maybe we start with, the early days of fraud. And when I look at it, right, early days of frauds to me means physical card theft, means forged signatures. I mean,
yeah.
I don't think that I want to tell the stories around forged signatures, but that was something. Card cloning. I think, let's look back at your retail days and look at the early days of fraud and how you dealt with them.
That is a great place to start. Now, a lot of retail folks are usually younger, on the younger side. So as a young teenager, taking credit cards from people, taking cash from people, and taking checks from people was something that was a daily occurrence for me. I always hated checks. I think most of us hated checks, especially when you got to put them through the machine and all that. But I think my first experience with fraud was going back through when we were planning this, was going to be the fake checks or forged checks. And that was probably the most common one I'd see. And how you handle that, you can kind of tell. So you kind of have to go with your gut. Does something feel off here? And usually the person on the other side of the table is acting a little strange, or you'll see blurry, the check print, it'll be blurry, or it looks like the signature has been rubbed off and then redone. There's just a lot of weird signs. Now, when you're a young kid in retail, you're kind of just trying to fumble through the transaction and get it done at the end of the day. But as you get a little more experience, you start to look for those things. But the challenge is always, how do you address the person on that? And so my answer usually was, there's something wrong with this payment method. Can we try another one? So, because if you're holding an obviously fake check, you can't just call out the person and say, this is a fake check. You say, hey, for whatever reason, the machine isn't taking the check. Do you have another way to pay? And usually they don't. So that was usually probably my first foray into that. Card cloning was another one. it was when you could buy card blanks. You could get them on eBay. This was a long time ago. So if a card is just like white, like, there's like, it's just a mag strip, there's something off about this. Like I'm used to seeing US Bank, Bank of America, and mostly debit cards up there in that particular part of the country, like not a lot of high end cards there. So those sorts of cards, again, do you have a different payment method?
It's funny because you're already talking about, some of the things that you've seen, but also some of the preventions that have been there,
I
right?
guess it's
Like,
just in my nature,
yeah, like CVV, holograms, making
Yeah,
strips.
and if you're not seeing those sorts of things, like the cards nowadays, which I love that they're like more flat and they're more sleek, and which is great for like phone wallets and like even like the slim wallets, which is the ones like I like to run. But back in the day, like if you didn't have embossing on your card,
Yeah.
or you didn't have that hologram, like something was off about that card. And like it was kind of at the time where they started making like temporary cards. Like if you lost your debit card, you could go to US Bank and say, give me like another one, and they would do it. But those looked like a printed card. But at the same time, you can tell the difference between those and one that someone printed in their basement, at the end of the day.
What's What's funny is, we start with the retail aspect of things, right? And like obviously things have evolved, COVID, everything else. So
Yeah,
like
a little bit.
as things kind of evolved, right? It went on to kind of, let's call it the digital shift. Right. And that digital shift meant a lot of changes. It's not as easy to identify, like if the card is real, it's not real, like looking at it because you don't actually see it. So like there's a lot of things that change. What do you think kind of marked the shift, right,
Yeah.
on that front?
I mean, obviously, COVID was like we were already a pretty online society by then. It just accelerated probably mass purchasing online. I would say that the people were scared to buy online. They were very scared. Like, and remember, I would always be like, look for the lock, on the checkout and all that. And that was kind of like people's first, like, the consumer was more scared than I think the merchant was of having fraud. The consumer was more scared that the merchant was going to take the credit card and run away with it. Now, for I think the early days for me, like pre-device ID was more transaction counting, looking at zip codes versus like any IP geolocation that I'd have, like the easy low-hanging fruit stuff
Yeah.
that like people easily spoof now. But at the time, like the fraudsters weren't as sophisticated, so they weren't thinking about those like hiding their IP, or they might hide their IP, but they wouldn't really hide their location as much, like where the IP was. But that was kind of like, it was a lot easier to spot, again, if something was wrong
Yeah.
about the transaction. I remember like when we got device ID, it was like a complete revolution. I could see if they had a second monitor. I could see what the browser language was. I remember even before device ID, we used like browser strings, so you could kind of see like what type of computer it was. And it was just like really, really a lot of counting. Like I said it last night at dinner, the early days of fraud was a lot of counting. It was all velocity based, is what I feel like, is how many times did somebody do something?
What was the, I guess, I don't want to say dumbest mistake, but like the thing that you saw and were like, oh my God, seriously, like this again? Like people haven't figured out that like they shouldn't do this. Like, was there one thing that to you was
Browser language. As soon as I got
seriously?
browser language, yeah, like so Fandango was like the we were the only US based company, and then using Chinese language like keyboards and Chinese language browsers was just a dead giveaway, like
Okay.
every single time. So like literally, I would come in the morning and I would just run the transactions and say, show me anything that was Chinese language browser or Chinese language keyboard, and then they always did the same pattern on their emails, which was like, like the just bang your head on the keyboard type thing. So like you would just see, like it would just populate a whole list of just their transactions. And then it was like, I guess I was in the early days of like honeypotting, because we wouldn't cancel everything,
Yeah.
because I wanted to leave like one of the cards active so that I could see where they were going to try and purchase, but I would flag that card and then it would notify me where they're going so I could see what movie. And how it worked then, sorry, we're going to go on a wild tangent here, but it was a triangulation scheme, because those were like the common ones in the early days, where, and for people that don't know, a triangulation scheme is where somebody sets up like another website and then uses like it fulfills orders, but they fulfill those orders using stolen credit cards on the main site. So for Fandango, there was a company called Half Cost Ticks, and they set up their own website. They would do orders. They would scrape our site actually to get the times, and then they would, like, you would literally go on there, pay half price, and then they would use a stolen credit card to fulfill that order from me. So when I would honeypot them, as we'll use that in a loose term here, is
I love that term.
I would, it's a fun one, and I love Pooh Bear, but but they needed to fulfill that order. So they always had to fulfill that order. So if I made them think that they were getting it, or just put like a frustration, like it wasn't like a fraud block, but it was like some sort of other block, I could see them trying to use cards, and then they're just burning their cards like all day long. And I could just make them like just rip through their lists and just have a bad time. So wherever they bought those stolen credit cards, like they're just basically losing money at the end of the day. And then I would just go and cancel the ticket and obviously refund the transaction so I don't get the charge back.
I think someone like found their match, basically, is what I'm hearing. Like,
So
because you seem like that's one thing that I've always loved about you, and we've had conversations already. It's the passion that you have for like
I love this job.
for like puzzles and just
I
like
love
figuring out fraud
this is
payments.
everything to me.
I
This
love
was
it.
everything I wanted to do, and I didn't even realize I wanted to do it.
How did that happen?
Oh, yeah, this is a good story. So let's go back before Fandango. I had a skateboard company years ago that was doing pretty good, but it was in the pre-recession time.
Okay.
So the recession hit, people cut back on spending. My skateboard company was obviously one that wasn't going to survive. So I had to start over in life, and I took call center work. I needed healthcare. I have a couple of medical conditions that require multiple visits a year, which is fine. I'm fine. I'm fine, everybody. But I needed healthcare, and the call center work was reliable paychecks with healthcare. And one of those call centers was a Netflix call center in outside of Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
So it was back when instant watching that's what we used to call it. Instant watching was just becoming a thing. It's how we all watch Netflix now. So I did tech support there, primarily on the instant watching product. But I also took billing questions too. Now, one of the days, it was like a rapid shift. Is like normally my calls were probably like 80% doing troubleshooting on people's routers, and then 20% billing. And it all of a sudden shifted to the other way around, or it was billing. And they always were popping this one single account, Hogar Duncan. And I was friends with the guy in the research department, and I sent him all the data that I had. I was like, dude, I got like 6 calls back to back on this same account. And what we had found out had happened was we had just switched to $0 authorizations.
Okay.
With no captchas in any way, shape, or form. So what they were doing was hitting a list against us to check to see if the cards were alive or not. And then people would see their pending $0 on their statement, or they get their push on their notifications on their phone. And then they would call us and say, what's Netflix? Because they'd never heard of Netflix because it was 2010. So and then, so I left Netflix and came back to LA, where we're at now. And I tried to get another customer service job. So Fandango like literally had advertised on Craigslist. And I replied to a Craigslist ad. Could have been a scam, probably would have been a scam. But in 2010,
that would have been hilarious.
It was fine, you know? So they called me back, and I told that same story. And they go, literally, this is happening to us right now. And it was partially related to the half-cost tick thing. And they said, can you solve it? And I just totally lied through my teeth and was like, absolutely. I solved it there. I could solve it here. So they hired me, and they gave me a computer and said, go fix it. And I
make it till you
completely made it up as I went. And I did so well at it that I actually got called to one of the provider's offices because I was using the product in a way that they didn't want it to be used, but now wanted it to be used that way. And it was like how breaking apart individual pieces of a transaction, scoring the pieces instead of making a rule that was all encompassing.
This is fascinating because I've seen many partners, right? And I call like merchants or whoever we work with like partners in general. And when I look at them, we always look for companies that will help us either better leverage the product, either use it differently, even like just optimize for things, and kind of change the perspective and how we've been doing things. Why? Because you need to get better. Like not just in fraud, in payments as well. Things evolve so quickly. So there's always room for improvement.
There's
and working,
opportunity. 100%.
Working with people like you, honestly, like I think we need to make something happen. Is what I'm saying.
So I agree, and we should brainstorm on that. But I think for any solution providers that are listening right now, like I know that you're passionate about your product. I know you love your product, and you think that you know what everybody wants. But the best thing you can ever do is have user focus groups like a day,
100%.
and then just say, how are you using it? What are you using? Because somebody might be using a feature that you didn't realize was important and you had on the back burner, but is the most important feature to them. People might be using your product in a completely different way than anybody else, and you could learn so much and you could pivot. You might create a new module. You might create a whole new product out of one way that someone's doing things. So many of these fraud companies came out of people doing something different with a product that was never supposed to be that
I
product.
so love this. Like, that's one of the main reasons that I love what I do, and candidly, like, being able to speak about it here is pretty incredible. It's listening to people like yourself just talk about, things that, first of all, either I don't know about, second of all, things that I haven't looked at in that own perspective, and third, like, kind of makes me always learn and learn and learn. And so, like, I have not invented hot water, and I keep saying that as well, and I'll keep saying it. But when you talk to people that are like you, like yourself, like smart, and ultimately have seen, I mean, we're only on block number 2 right now,
Yeah,
and I'm
and
already
there's
learning.
23 of them, everybody.
There's there's not 23 of them, but there is a couple. But I'm already learning about things that you were solving for. And by the way, the fake it till you make it component of this is me on a daily basis as
Yeah,
well. So like
I
I
think we all are doing that pretty much at some point, like especially when driving. Like I driving around Southern California, everyone's faking it. They just aren't making it.
that is fair. Actually, one topic before we kind of go into like more of the modern fraud, like diving still on the past aspect of things. What were some of the preventions that, when the digital shift happened, what were some of the preventions that you saw kind of arise at that moment in time and were helpful?
I think especially in like the early 2010s, the most important thing was device ID, and then what came with that. So like obviously proxy piercing, which is a little harder to do now without Flash, but just the intelligence that you could get about a device that kind of gave you a definitive picture of it being
Yeah.
a singular device was super helpful. But now that in the modern age, as we progress this conversation, we can talk about that, but it's a little less effective. I think what came out of that in all of that, like you would have hundreds of attributes about a device, which was really cool for us to look at. But with the rise of online e-commerce traffic and how much volume was coming through, it was impossible for a human being to really
Yeah.
consume that much data and glean any real insights. So what we now call AI, what we used to call big data and machine learning, I think was probably one of the most important leap forward in fraud prevention, because now we can take all those device attributes that we get from this product that we used to just be hands on in and have kind of a computer tell us what we need to look at.
It's a double-edged sword because the computers can also tell the fraudsters what you guys are
So
looking
that's
at.
when they started coming back, and that's when we go to the evolution of COVID. Now, fraudsters figured out how to use their data and what works and doesn't work and hit us just as fast. So I used to call it adversarial AI. So they were hitting. Yeah, I can't take the credit for that. Darwinian was the one that originally called it that, so I have to give credit where credit is due. But I like the idea of how there can be an AI attacking, but if you are a modern fraud company, you can take one of those adversarial AIs and have it attack your own model and have your model learn from that. So basically AI against AI,
Their
total
companies
Skynet
doing
stuff
this.
here. But I think like to your point where you were going with that is, you know, fraudsters have access to some of these same tools now.
Yeah.
And a lot of the tools, like every company is probably putting some sort of LLM in right now, but I'm sure that their company is putting guardrails around it.
Yeah.
All of our tools have some sort of guardrail to keep it honest and keep us safe and keep us from divulging company secrets. Fraudsters, AIs don't have that. They
Yeah,
don't
no,
have that
I kind
limitation.
of love that differentiation, which is, you can always look at like the high level and then you dive into things deeper and then you start realizing, oh, but actually like something that is called the same at the same level, right? Like you have an AI basically helping you either mitigate fraud or on the fraud side, but still an AI, right? But then you look down and you realize, oh, but like the data that you get access to and the models that are being used are so different and you can't compare it's apples to oranges or even apples to chocolate. I prefer chocolate, but apples to chocolate. Actually, which perfect segue into like where I wanted to take this conversation, which is, like we've talked about the past, let's talk about modern fraud. Before even AI, let's talk about, what we've seen before, like the rise of bots, right? We're talking about people
Mhm.
Now you have like
Yeah, so
iHerb bots.
that's where like to great point. Like half cost ticks, for example. Let's go back to that on
Yeah.
my Fandango example. Those were people. Those were people that were doing it. And it started out, you could tell, as like one guy, and then he hired friends to do it. So he started scaling his operation. But in order to be profitable, I think in fraud now, for what has to go into it, like to get the list, to find an attack, to drop ship, to have mules, like you have to have a high rate of success
Yeah.
rapidly. And the only way to do that is to just blast as many people as fast as possible. And bots is the quickest and easiest and cheapest way to do that. Script it as far as possible in, script as many credit card forms as you possibly can. Find the site with the weakest security that's selling MacBook Pros and just hit it till they run out of inventory every single day. Then go and do it on your Switch too. And that's the thing, is like there's, you know, the more sophisticated websites, the Walmarts, the Targets that have teams of people like myself that are sitting there, they're not going to be the easy targets, but you know, the mom and pop like stores
Yeah.
that are like little tiny 2 or 3 store chains, those are the ones that are going to have like a lot of BOPIS type stuff, where they're not going to realize that the people coming in to pick those up aren't the people that really own that credit card. And then they're just going to keep like, oh, that's great, you bought 32-inch TVs today, you know, like you must have a sports bar or something, when really they're just going to go turn it around on Craigslist for $10 a piece, you know, and make some money. But like, it's just it's scale. It all boils down to scale. It used to be like people used to do fraud casually to like supplement their income, their side hustle, if you will. Now it's people's full-time job. There's some of these companies have like staff, they have benefits, they have time off. Like these are real sophisticated,
This
and
is
that's not
crazy.
even talking about the scams where like they go from hundreds of dollars a transaction to $1 million a transaction, you know, like these, it's all scale. And it's how great you might have a 90% failure rate with your bots, but that 10% success rate is way more profitable than when you were doing it by hand and had a 70% success rate, because the scale of it was
So
just so
much.
much larger.
So like this was one component, and I kind of love touching on this, but let's take it to, I think, one of your favorite topics,
Mm.
friendly fraud.
Friendly fraud. That is should be every merchant's number one focus right now.
Why?
Well, a year ago, MasterCard put out a report in March of 2024 that 74% of all digital transactions was friendly fraud. The cardholder actually participated in it and claimed fraud. 74%.
This is crazy.
I am hearing numbers. Yeah, you can go look it up, everybody. It's on MasterCard's website. It's literally a press release on their site. So I'm not just pulling numbers out of my booty here. It's real. And I am hearing reports that some people are saying it's upwards of 90% now. Now, on my site, we look at the intelligence that we have, and we say probably 30% is what we're seeing. So, I would say that's probably a more grounded number for pre-COVID. But I think in COVID, everybody figured out you get your first one free. And that's kind of a buy each website. So you go in, you claim fraud, so you buy that new MacBook Pro again, claim fraud, you get it for free at the end of the day. Now, hopefully Apple shuts it off, but they don't always do it if you buy it from a third-party retailer. I think that is the single most important vector for losses right now for merchants outside of scams. Like, but those, we're talking about merchants right now. And that's because everything matches. All of the intelligence that you have about the transaction is accurate. It's the right address. It's the right location. It's the right IP. It's the right identity. It's just they're going to claim fraud.
How do you combat that?
So
Just history, maybe?
Well,
like you've seen it multiple times
so
in the same card?
right now, what people are going to have to do is they have to have intelligence across their solution provider to say that it's happened at other sites.
So it's
but
not you solving it. It's going to be someone else that has.
I have to have consortium data,
Yeah, I agree.
essentially, at the end of the day. But it sucks because, like, you see, like, Visa has tried to address it, for example, by doing compelling evidence 2 and then now compelling evidence 3.0. But the restrictions on that were the transaction, they have to have another transaction on your site that's greater than 120 days, but less than 365 days, puts you in the spot that if it's the first time you've ever seen that person, you're screwed.
Yeah,
essentially,
there's
at the
no
end
way
of the
for you
day.
to find it.
Like, you have to hope that they're a repeat customer. And I would say that a lot of the people that are doing this outside of like the PlayStations and the kids buying like whatever Fortnite bucks, whatever they call those, is somebody going and buying some sort of piece of technology for the first time from that site. So this is where I get controversial, and I want everybody to know this is Jordan's hot take. It's my personal opinion. Is not. It is also the opinion of Fraudboxer, by the way, but not the opinion of my day job or connecting the dots in fintech. But I think the only way that we have change here is if we can prove to the issuing side that there is financial consequences to the actual card holder outside of just taking the money back, like legal financial consequences like fines, misdemeanors, those sorts of things. Now we're talking crazy, but I think the only way that we can slow this behavior is through legislation at
I
the end of the day.
I don't know that I would say it's crazy. I think, like consumers at the end of the day are also one major component and party that we always think of whenever we're on the provider side or merchant side. They have such a big role into the transaction flow. Like they're the ones initiating it. Friendly fraud is something that they are the ones ultimately playing with.
Mm-hmm.
There should be some consequences. I mean, like again, this is the Arthur
Yeah, there
point
should
of
be some
view,
consequences.
but
But here,
I don't know if legislations or anything such as would be the way that I would look at it. But that's something maybe for people at least smarter than me to figure out.
I think that there's
But
going to have to be
something.
lawyers from, I think it's going to have to be issuers and getting together with the networks to come up with a solution. And then I think they're going to have to put some sort of something forward. But there's going to have to be amendments to cardholder agreements. There's going to have to be all sorts of things that change, which I don't think is the biggest hill to climb. I think after you do a couple, people will get scared,
I don't know.
But I also think if you really want to get like real crazy with it, from other conversations I know you're having, is what is agentic AI's role going to play when now those consumers say, I really didn't do it, and it was an agent that came in and bought it. So this is where, again, on these agents, I think for us to have a real breakthrough moment in acceptance of agents is we're going to have, which they already do, verified agents. And like you can see, especially with your providers, what a verified agent is, but there's going to have to become a liability shift if a legitimate agent is used from the merchant, just like we do with 3D
Yeah,
Secure.
but there's so many layers to this because we're only talking about cards.
Yeah, but so
Imagine, of a payment method is going to be very different because the process
So
to
for me, most of my payment methods, I don't have financial liability if I'm taking like Alipay's, WeChat Pays, Pix, for example, and then obviously stable coins,
but
which
from
is
an
coming on
agent
pipe now.
perspective, it might be different, right? Because the way that you get the money back is also going to be different
So
depending on the payment method.
I think that in order for me to feel personally comfortable, now this is early days of agentic AI.
Yeah, yeah.
It's only been out for 3 weeks, but but I think for me to feel comfortable is any purchase, any sort of money changing hands that happens out of an agent transaction needs to be guaranteed essentially by the agent provider or by the payment token owner at
Agreed.
the end of the day. But that's a story for another day,
Yeah,
everybody. Like,
we can probably take another 45 on this one. I guess, we've talked about frauds and I guess for me, I'm a payments nerd. I think I've said it a couple times. Payments to me is at the center of this, right?
if there was no payments, there'd be no fraud.
Exactly. And so like when I look at it from that perspective, like I'm really curious on what your opinion is on to why payments matter more than ever when it comes to fraud.
I think that we went all the way back. We talked about like the first day when you made your first transaction online, you had to go look for the lock. If you look at like what forms looked like then and how difficult it was to purchase something online, and then what it is now and how easy, like we've spent our entire careers trying to make it easier for people to purchase. And then not only purchase with credit cards, but purchase with any way we could possibly get money out of their wallet into the merchant's bank account, no matter what that may be. And I think that with that, payments became the heartbeat of everything. But we focus so much on authentication, which I always talk about, like from a fraud guy, and I don't do payments at iHerb. I'm close to the payments team. I work with the payments team a lot, obviously, but I always tell people when I'm on stage at like MRC or MAG or any of those that you should really don't worry about your basis points on your chargebacks. Worry about your authorization rates on your payments, because you're measuring your chargebacks in basis points. But you're measuring, if for whatever reason, I guarantee you're monitoring your authorization rates in full points. So if you can move the needle so much further by looking at optimizing payment authorization than you could ever do trying to win 10 basis points of a charge back, like it's just payments are the bread and butter and how you get people through, how you can find a way to hopefully remove fraud from the equation, but also like, you have other episodes about like payment authentication and identity and how those relate. I think they're really going to become intertwined. You see enhanced authorizations and those things happening already. I think they're going to become more entwined where your payment is going to also be your person.
So I think like innovation is a big component of what you're talking about right now in the
Yeah.
payment space, and like EMV, tokenization, wallets, biometrics, all of which. What do you think ultimately is going to be the balance, right? Because you need
Mm.
innovation, but at the same time, there's traditions and like
Yeah.
rules and regulations. Where do you think the balance is to mitigate? Because taking fraud out, not gonna happen.
Yeah.
Mitigating it, most likely,
Mitigating
definitely.
you could do. I
So,
think.
like, how do you see the intersection of
Oh, you
those
really
two,
want to say it?
innovation and everything else? Of
I got you.
course.
I got you. I don't want to say the word super app, but it's where my mind immediately goes, is to where a payment from me as a person becomes one single token. And then whatever is on the back end of that
Yeah,
is that's on me. So you as a merchant will only ever just get your funds, whatever it may be. But me, how I'm funding that purchase, you will have no idea. Like it could be a stable coin, it could be a bank transfer, it could be a credit card, it could be a debit card, it could be beans.
just get the fun.
Just get the funds and it doesn't matter because the merchant, they just want their money. And I think that it's going to come down to where essentially like we have a social security number, but for payments where it's everything's tied to that. And the only way that we have a real breakthrough with that is if it's guaranteed.
Yeah.
It's like if that's and biometrics are part of the answer to that. Like anytime there's a biometric, like every time you see that token as me as a merchant or you as a merchant, you see that token come in, it has to be biometrically authenticated. So, and there can be no other way that it could be anybody else, essentially. But I mean, we're a long ways off because everybody wants their nut along the journey. And that removes a lot of nuts. You see Visa trying something like that with Visa Flexible Credential right now, and the adoption seems to be fairly low, but I don't know how many issuers are actively
Let's see
participating in
how
it.
things evolve over time, but
Yeah.
I agree with you.
But I think that like once people feel comfortable with it, like it's the same thing that happens with even making online purchases to begin with. Once people feel comfortable with it, Apple Pay is another great example. People were freaking out about Apple Pay. Cards on my phone? What do you mean? Now it's everywhere. Like once people feel comfortable and they experience it once, then they do it more. Like that's when you have real change. Because in order to have change, you have to have adoption.
I agree. Takes it to the perfect spot, which is how do you protect customers, right? Like once it's adopted, how do you protect customers without rejecting the good ones by mistake?
So I think like the big thing is like customers always want to feel safe, but they don't want to be bothered at the end of the day.
Good luck.
And anytime like anything bad happens or anybody sees any unrecognized charges on their credit card, it's always that merchant that gets the blame for having weak security. But also at the same time, they don't want to jump through an authentication, like they don't want to do EMV like 3D secure. They don't want to have to verify their email address and verify their phone numbers. Like I did an Instagram thing today that it was like 6 different steps of authentication, and I almost abandoned the whole thing because it took me like 5 minutes, and like that's too much authentication.
Agreed.
It didn't need that. Oh, and then I had to do the head thing. I'm like, bro, you already got everything else for me. That's a story for another day.
Especially just to pause on this, like 1 second, especially whenever Instagram purchases are usually feeling based, like they're like,
And
oh,
that
I've
should
seen
be
this 15 times. I'm just going to purchase it now. And you see like, like a guy that looks like 10x what you would look like wearing it. And you're like, okay, fine. Like I could look good in this. So you just buy it because of it. And then you're like, I made a mistake. I should know about this. So like
they charge it back.
exactly the 6 different steps are actually just a massive problem. But that's a story
Yeah,
for
I
another
mean,
time.
and that's what like my company, we spend all of our time because we have competitors in some places. And like our whole thing is getting people through the journey as quick as humanly possible. But at the same time, like as secure as possible, and there is a balance on that is like, what can you do on the back? And I think that that's where, so we do on like account login and like for ATO prevention and all that is we try, and even account sign up is run as much of like our tools in the background as humanly possible, because you could make everybody verify their email. You could make everybody verify their phone number. You're going to have drop off. If you could do that without them knowing it, and get the validation. And even if you get a rejection on one of those fields, look at the rest of the holistic part of the transaction and be like, okay, yeah, his email, I couldn't validate his email. I could his phone, but everything else we see, we good. You could still let him go. It's only those ones that really expose stuff that you need to do anything instead of just this blanket, you have to authenticate everybody. And that's where like you can swing it too much to where so expected friction is another thing. We're going all over the place here. Is like if I'm buying a car online, I expect authentication. But if I'm buying a t-shirt, I don't want authentication. So there should be a time and a place for expected authentication or expected friction at the end of the day. But it's always a balancing act of like, how do you make people feel secure without bothering them while actually being secure? Did that answer your question at all?
It does actually. It's so many different layers, and that's the beauty of fraud. Actually, is there's so much to watch out for. When I think about like your entire journey and where you come from, where we are, I also want to think about what's ahead, right? And like when I think about what's ahead, like what's next in fraud and defense, maybe the regulatory side, maybe the technologies, like how do you see that?
I really think that the blending of cybersecurity and fraud it's gonna become one.
Okay.
Because they're essentially going to be the same thing. I also think that like the only way that we get into those futures is with things like passkeys, and then your favorite thing in the whole world, tokens, and token all the things. Everybody, don't just not just network tokens, not just payment tokens, but I think that like passkeys are one of my favorite things. I think that was a huge step forward in not only logins and my convenience of being able just to put my finger down, but consumer trust, making it easier to log in, but harder for somebody else to log in, which is like nirvana, right? At the end of the day, is like, how can you make something more secure while still making it easier? That's everything at the end of the day. And I think, agentic AI is going to be a big thing. And I think all of those things are going to come in because there's tokens are going to play into that. Biometrics are going to play into that. Like I have this AI agent going to buy something, whether it be like I told my Google agent to go buy, I told my ChatGPT agent to go buy it, but it was biometrically authenticated and the payment came through as a 3D secured token, good to go, even though it's a headless browser and I can't see a dang thing about it. Like, let them go. I think that that's where it's going to be. But I also think that without liability shifts, we won't get there because that will diminish merchant trust. And I also think that without consumer punishments, I'm going to come back to that again. Without consumer punishments, we're not going to see a change in behavior.
No, like we're gonna wrap up at this point, but I could not agree more on most of what you're saying. I think, of course, like we'll have to see like the look ahead.
What did I get wrong?
There's it's not that you got anything wrong, actually. I just think that, for example, on the consumer front of things, right? Like, I don't know that regulations. I also don't know that like it's the merchants that will have to take care of it, or potentially the providers. Like that, like there are many layers to that topic. I do think, though, like candidly, that you're right. Like the consumers should be involved in the consequences of like friendly fraud, for example, fraud in general.
I'm guilty of doing what I say not to do all the time, which is focusing on the negative, because that's what I do all day for my job, is focus on like what consumers are up to negatively, and not the vast majority of consumers that are just want to buy a t-shirt and move on, or just want to buy vitamin D and move on. Which is the vast majority of consumers. Yeah. But I focus on the negative because that's what I do with my job. So of course I'm going to jump right away to punish them all, legislation, change the rules for everybody. But while also in the same breath saying, we got to make it easier for people to log in, at the same time. Like I'm aware of that. And overall, like the vast majority of consumers are good, and we don't need to blow up the mass for the few.
I agree.
I guess.
No, I so agree. I think, like when we first started having the conversation, we decided to do this podcast. I knew that fraud was going to be interesting. I didn't think it was going to be this interesting. So like, honestly,
I make it interesting.
You do. So like, Jordan, seriously, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
As a final kind of advice for companies, be proactive, not reactive, and for users, stay informed, stay alerted, and please avoid friendly fraud.
Please do that.
But this was a lovely conversation. Thank you once again for joining. And candidly, I mean, The Fraud Boxer is an amazing podcast. Maybe you should tell everyone where you can find it, because it's definitely worth a listen.
So it is on every every podcast platform out there. So Apple, Spotify, YouTube. YouTube's the primary one these days. So basically anywhere you could ever get podcasts. If you want the easy step, www.fraudboxer.com.
I love it. Well, thanks everyone for joining, and I hope that you had a good one on this one. Thanks, Ron.
Thank you.